always appreciate the way you moderate these sessions. So thank you for being willing to do that. And thank you, Lauren, for asking me to do this. When Lauren asked me, I wasn't sure what I had done to deserve this challenge, given that and I have not been immersed in religious liberty issues as your family, Randy, and others may have, but I do have an interest in it. And I can tell you that preparing for this presentation has been really, really helpful to me. You know, often when you have to teach something, you learn a whole lot more than if you are a student. So it's been a fun journey, and certainly what I have gathered in the last few weeks for this presentation, it's not the sum total of it. And so I am relying on you folk to contribute to what happens here. Okay, so we're talking about competing religious freedoms. Freedom is such a wonderful reality that everyone has access to, should have. Some, unfortunately, have less than some others because of where we live and because of various social conditions. But the bottom line is that freedom to be, freedom to do is a beautiful and wonderful gift. So the thesis for my presentation is this, that freedom of conscience, freedom of religion are more than just ideas or abstract ideas. They have to intersect with life, with our life as individuals, with our lives as a community, in order for religious liberty or freedom of conscience to really matter. Freedom is what gives people space to act on what they consider to be essential to their moral vision for life. And freedom, as you can appreciate, can be used as a shield or as a sword. And when it is, then it becomes corrosive, it becomes burdensome. So why does this topic matter? I think ultimately it matters because Jesus matters. We probably could spend a lot of time talking about that, about the life of Jesus, the values that he lived by and demonstrated, his life of inclusion, of acceptance, and on and on and on. But freedom seemed to matter to Jesus in the way he lived. And certainly freedom matters to God. That is something that we embrace from our understanding of the Bible. This topic matters also because to undermine religious freedom is to undermine our dignity as persons, our capacity for human flourishing, our desire and our quest for justice and peace, and the possibility of our living a productive and fulfilled life. For all of these and more reasons, freedom matters. Freedom of conscience, freedom of religion matters. And I might suggest that asserting our religious freedom does not happen in isolation. And often it impinges on someone else's freedom. And that is the basis of the particular approach we're taking to our discussion on freedom today. Often the way we express our freedom impinges on someone else's freedoms. And so how do we avoid that? How do you exercise our freedom without trampling on someone else's? And does that matter to us? Or how much does that matter to us as individuals and maybe even as a faith community? As Randy has said, you will have time to weigh in on this from your own experience, from your understanding. So I'm going to pose 3 questions, which I will post again at the end, asking you what are the challenges to the free exercise of conscience, freedom, religious liberty do you see? What challenges do you see? And what pathways do you see to overcoming these challenges? Perhaps there are case studies, there are examples that you can share with us that could enrich our conversation. So please keep thinking about this. It will be a monologue for a little while, but after that, hopefully we'll have a rich dialogue and you will weigh in. So there are 3 arenas in which we can have this conversation. One, of course, is religious freedom and the law, where the question of religious liberty is a legal, constitutional question. And that is not where I'm going. That is not my expertise. It's not my specialty. And of course, there are volumes and volumes that have been written and people who have invested much of their professional lives in trying to understand this and navigating through this. But it is an important arena, how religious freedom and the law intersect. What I'm more interested in this presentation is how religious freedom plays out in our individual lives, where the question relates to personal freedom of thought, of conscience, of religious expression, and so on. Then there's also the arena of religious freedom in community life, where the question relates to the freedom of a community, of a faith community, perhaps, to live in accordance with the moral vision shared among its members. And that too is a very valid conversation, but we'll try to focus more on this second arena while we touch a little bit on the third one as well. So here's how I'm going to go. I'm going to present a case study, a little bit of a theory, mainly about the meaning of some terms. We will talk about some current issues. I've listed some of these in on the website, and the Adventist Today website that introduced this particular session. And besides identifying the problems, I would like to suggest a way forward individually, not as a collective church or a state, but individually. And then, of course, it will be your turn. So let me begin with the case study, and I am going to go to a part of Ohio that I happen to love a great deal. Our Ohio Conference office was located not too far from Holmes County, Ohio, which had the largest Amish community in the state and one of the largest in the country. Between Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, there are large Amish communities. Sometimes there is a question whether Ohio's Holmes County Amish community is larger than Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, or the other way around. Regardless, it's a pretty large community. It's a very picturesque part of Ohio. I was told once that there are more tourist buses that come to Holmes County to visit this community than any other place in Ohio. I had a friend who lived there, who was a pastor in Columbus, Ohio, who retired, and over the years had built a friendship with some of the Amish families. And so they helped him to buy a house right in the heart of the Amish community in Holmes County. His neighbors were all Amish. And I would love to drive up there. Besides my work travel, I suppose I traveled more to visit him and this community than any other part of Ohio. And I would just love to sit there on the porch and watch the Amish work, do what they do. And I had the chance to visit many of their homes. He introduced me to the Amish bishop of the area and a whole lot of other experiences. And I learned to appreciate this community. Not that I was tempted to become an Amish, but their countercultural lifestyle and their commitment to it and the earnestness with which they do it appealed to me. So I thought I will present this as a case study, not in any way to cast a shadow on their lives, but to raise some interesting questions. So the question is, of course, about freedom of conscience, the freedom of conscience and the Amish. Now, the Amish claim to be committed to the biblical notion of being in the world, but not of the world. That, they would say, is the primary foundational basis for them to do what they do and to abstain from what they abstain, to pursue a particular lifestyle, which to some of us might seem very, very extreme. But the biblical mandate or the biblical task, as they understand it, to be in the world, but not of the world. Now, a lesser issue for them is this practical matter of rejecting what they might consider to be the tyranny of convenience. And the idea here is that convenience, while it is created to free us, as it were, can also enslave us, that it can threaten to erase the struggles and challenges that help give meaning to life. So that's also another lesser issue that guides them in living the way they do. The biblical task to be in the world, not of the world, and a practical task. Now, the Amish have been able to live in Holmes County, Ohio for at least a couple of centuries. Came there in the 1800s, as also same time they came to Pennsylvania. And for the most part, their lifestyle does not present a problem to others, either in that community or elsewhere. And over time, society has made some concessions, legislatively and otherwise, to accommodate some parts of their lifestyle. But in general, people who are non-Amish would not say that their way of living is in any way impinging on their religious liberties. So here are some things you will observe if you have not been exposed to the Amish at all. They do not use electricity from the public grid, meaning that they do not wish to be connected to the rest outside world through electricity. They do have appliances that are run on battery or on gasoline-powered motors and so on, but not from the public grid. No telephones in their homes. If you still want to see a public telephone booth, you will find those in the Amish territory. No central heating, air-conditioned systems that are powered by electricity. Amish do not drive automobiles for the most part. By the way, there are several orders of Amish, and some of them are far more strict than others. No tractors with pneumatic tires, and they do their farm work with horse-drawn machinery. Married men are required to wear beards, but mustaches are not allowed. And that is because in Switzerland and parts of Germany, from where they came, where they were persecuted, those in the military wore mustaches. And so they decided they did not want to be in any way associated with that lifestyle or that appearance. So mustaches are banned. Members dress in plain and traditional styles of clothing. The strictest Amish would not even have buttons on their clothing, just have simple hooks. They have one-room school houses, and their children are educated up to the 8th grade. And that has caused some issues outside the Amish community, and we'll come to that. No meeting houses are allowed, no church buildings. They gather in their homes, in their barns for worship. And they have what they call the church wagon, where they would pile up the pews, and then they'll take it from one home to another on different Sundays. When my friend who lived there died, they asked me to do his funeral. And his funeral was held in his neighbor's barn, a very plain wooden casket. And after the service, they loaded it up onto a horse-drawn buggy and took it out to the burial ground. But they meet in barns, in garages, as we might call them, and that's where they have their worship services. And they go for very long, sometimes up to 3 hours, sitting on these benches that have no backs to lean on. Amish don't participate in military service, avoid conscription. If they're self-employed, they're exempt from paying Social Security taxes. They do not purchase health insurance. If they do end up in the hospital or requiring health care, the community comes together and pays for such care. They object to immunizations because that they see as a form of insurance against future harm. And that too, in recent years, has caused some issues. And they enjoy some exemptions for land use and zoning. So this is a sort of a list of the kinds of things that Amish do and don't do. And for the most part, these practices do not impinge on the religious freedoms of those outside of that community, for the most part. Now, interestingly, paradoxically, however, the freedom to live by these norms does not always extend to those Amish who do not practice them within the Amish community. As a community, they enjoy the freedom to practice these. But in some ways, the same freedoms are not extended to the individuals within the community who might choose to violate those practices. And so the Amish have the practice of what they call shunning, in which they, if somebody does not subscribe to the norms, they get isolated, ignored, punished. That's shunning. And then for a serious kind of offense, they are excommunicated, which means that they're thrown out and banished from the community. Now, even as I say this, you probably can sense that this kind of treatment of those who do not subscribe to the norms is not limited to the Amish. We might champion religious liberty and freedom outside of our community, but not be willing to extend that same freedom to those inside the community who may step over the bounds of some of the norms. So you have the dilemma of competing freedoms. And that's where I want to try to focus the rest of what I have to say. Some terms that we use: freedom of conscience, religious freedom, religious liberty. In some ways, these overlap, but there are nuances of differences. Freedom is a capacity to be and do things in the world, while liberty, as I have begun to understand it, is the absence of external institutional constraints on one's freedom. So in that sense, religious freedom and religious liberty have some nuanced differences. And this institutional constraint could be the state, government, it could be the church, it could be any institution. So let's think a little bit about freedom of conscience. Conscience is a form of spiritual intuition that drives us to act in a certain way, to behave in a certain way. Freedom of conscience, I might say, is a part of what it means to be created in the image of God. And it comes with the sense of human dignity and freedom. In a class that I teach here at Kettering College, when we talk about atheism, I would ask students where they think this notion of conscience comes from. If you don't connect with the notion of a creator God, and are more inclined to think about atoms and molecules coming together over millions of years and human life coming out of that, at what point do atoms and molecules skip over and create a mind? Where does mind come from in that sequence of atoms and molecules becoming human? And in that same vein, where does conscience come from? So I like to connect conscience to our beginnings, created in the image of God. And I see conscience covering those things that we humans cherish, ethics and values, whether they are religious or not. Conscience not necessarily connected with religion, but with values and ethics. And of course, conscience might also distinguish humans from all other life forms. So once again, going back to my class, I gave this to them this last week. And in the context of conscience and where it comes from, I want to read this through and have you think about whether you agree with this or not. We are from God, and we carry in our minds and hearts the ripple of the divine mind. Wisdom is deeper within us than the ignorance of what we have done or become. The passion of God for what is just and right is deeper within us than any apathy or participation in wrong that has crippled us. Creativity is at the core of our being, deeper than any barrenness that has dominated our lives and our relationships. When we are creative, we are in the rhythm of the divine creator. Love and the desire to give ourselves away to one another in love is at the heart of who we are, deeper than any fear or hatred that holds us hostage. You pack all of this together, and I might say you get conscience, wisdom, passion for what is right, creativity, love, desire to give ourselves away, that all of this come in this package that we call conscience. So freedom of conscience is a sort of a spiritual intuition that drives us to act. And that is partly what it means to be created in the image of God. Then you have religious freedom. And as I have understood this, there's slightly nuanced differences between religious freedom and religious liberty. Religious freedom is the freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of our choice to change religion or belief, the freedom to express religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. And as we think about this, you can assess whether you feel you have this freedom to believe, change belief, express belief. Now, religious liberty frequently describes the freedom of a community to live in accordance with a moral vision. It is the absence of external institutional constraints. So liberty has this added nuanced idea that it is free of any external institutional constraints. Again, the state, the church, any other form of institution. And religious liberty is, again, the right to practice one's religion, along with other members of the religious community. And it has some relational commitments. We enjoy our liberty in relationship with others who are of the same faith community. So those are individual expressions of religion. Now, there is also the institutions that enjoy religious liberty. There is there are associational dimensions. And some rights and privileges are available to individuals because they are part of a religious community. And because you're part of that community, you're vested with some freedoms. Now, the Adventist Church has had a long history of engagement with religious liberty. We have a whole department, Public Affairs and Religious Liberty, PARL. We publish a journal, Liberty, have published it for many, many years. The PARL website lists these definitions. And I was struck when I read this with the use of the word right so many times. The primordial human right that undergirds all human rights. That is how we consider religious liberty to be, the primordial human right, a right that we've had from the very beginning, the beginning of all things. The fundamental human right to have, adopt, or change one's religion or religious belief according to conscience, and to manifest and practice one's religion individually or in fellowship with other believers in prayer, devotion, witness, and so on. And again, as we read this and think about this, we are brought back to the Amish dilemma. Are we more ready to advocate for this for those outside the faith community? Are we willing to extend the same right, freedom to those within the community who choose to take this seriously, to have, adopt, or change one's religion or religious belief according to their conscience? Now, interestingly, this notion of religious freedom is enshrined in the sacred texts of just about all world religions. And I highlight this for a reason, which I will come to here in a moment. Confucianism, the Analects of Confucius, written some 400-500 BCE, do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself. The Mahabharata, the Hindu epic, which some say go back perhaps to 2000 BCE, this is the sum of all duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you. Buddhism, hurt not others in ways that you yourself will find hurtful. Islam, and this might surprise some of you, there shall be no compulsion in religion. That's what the Quran says. The truth is from your Lord. So let he or she who please believe, and let he or she who please disbelieve. Does that match with what you the impressions that you have of Islam. Sikhism, no one shall coerce another, nor one shall exploit another. Everyone, each individual has the inalienable birthright to seek and pursue happiness and self-fulfillment. Love and persuasion is the only law of social coherence. Guru Granth Sahib is the sacred text. Actually, it is considered a living guru in Sikhism, a teacher. Baha'is, when freedom of conscience, liberty of thought, and right of speech prevail, that is to say, when every man, according to his own idealization, may give expression to his beliefs, development and growth are inevitable. You're familiar with Joshua's call, but if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve. And then the words of Jesus, do to others as you would like them to do to you. Well, the reason I put this up is because although the call to freedom is enshrined in the sacred texts, in the foundational texts of all of these religions, it is ironic, it's paradoxical, that where these religions are the majority population, often there is a restriction, a denial of religious freedom to those who are not of that faith community. And you can look across the globe and find that where different religions are a majority, often there is a restriction of religious liberty to those who are not of that community. Again, despite the call within the sacred text to value religious freedom. We will not go into the weeds of this, but there is government restrictions on religion in many, many, many countries. And this Pew survey was done in 2019. And depending on the surveys that you read, some 60 to 80% of the global population is in the countries where there are restrictions to religious freedom. So coming to some other case studies in our time, these are ones that I posted on the website, on my article. 4 Sikh men in the District of Columbia sought an exemption from the requirement to shave their beards in order to serve in the Marines. They claimed that that violated their religious freedom of not cutting their hair. There have been many cases of Muslim women being either denied employment or terminated from employment for wearing the hijab. There have been instances where bakers and photographers and florists have refused to service marriages of same-sex couples, claiming religious liberty as the reason. You've seen the debate on abortion and how the Jewish community and other communities have said that a complete ban on abortion is a violation of their religious liberties. And then you have the issue of the Amish children being educated only up to the 8th grade. Some have claimed that that restricts their ability to be fully functioning humans. And there have been religious liberty issues with that, with Sabbath observance. And I posted the little note about a mailman who considered Sunday to be a Sabbath. When the US Postal Service teamed up with Amazon for delivery and they required Sunday deliveries, he refused to do it, and that became a religious liberty issue. Then, of course, we've had in recent times all the debates about the wearing of masks and vaccinations, and whether that violates religious liberty. Going back to the biblical story, you have the example of Daniel's three companions, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, who refuse on religious liberty grounds, in a sense, to worship the image. We want to make it clear to you, Your Majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the golden statue you have set up. And then you have the example of Daniel, who opens his window right in view and prays 3 times a day. Again, exercising his religious liberty, his freedom, and gets thrown into the den of lions. So you have these current issues, prayer in public gatherings, marriage equality, reproductive health, Christian nationalism, the use of psychedelics in spiritual rituals among Native Americans and others. About prayer, I found this interesting. Somebody posted on Twitter, if you're okay with having Muslim, Jewish, and Hindu students sit through a Christian prayer in public school, and not okay with having Christian students sit through a Muslim, Jewish, or Hindu prayer, then it is not religious freedom, it is religious oppression. So it is kind of ironic, isn't it, that we might advocate for prayer as long as it is a Christian prayer, but not be comfortable with any other type of prayer. Here in the United States, we are hearing a lot these days about Christian nationalism. And that is the notion that America is a nation by and for Christians alone. And if you advocate for that, then you've got to think about where does that leave everybody else who calls themselves an American legitimately. It is an ideology that uses religious liberty as the rationale for circumventing laws and regulations aimed at protecting a pluralistic democracy, such as non-discrimination protections for LGBTQI people, for women, for religious minorities. So Christian nationalism is a way of saying, no, we don't recognize any of that. What does that do to freedoms? We've been reading a lot, seeing a lot about marriage equality. Laws prohibiting same-gender marriage imply that some citizens as unfit for the blessings of God in marriage. Again, religious liberty claims on both sides. And people, as we've just noted, engage in activity as bakers or photographers or florists who will claim religious liberty as a reason to avoid servicing same-gender marriage events. We had an excellent presentation here on this ATSS on abortion. So you recall that among the issues at play with abortion is the debate as to when a fetus becomes a human person. Does that happen at conception, at birth? When does it happen? And the freedom that women have as moral agents with the right and the capacity and the responsibility to make decisions about their reproductive health and specific circumstances of hardship, violence, and horror. We won't repeat a lot of what was said here, but you have, again, religious liberty issues there. And then you have the issue of the use of psychedelics in religious ceremonies and the clash of religious liberty issues with that practice as well. So this is something that touches us where we are. And I'm going to end with some suggestions on what I see as a way forward. And I suggest that tolerance isn't enough, that tolerance of others and others' differences is too low a bar. Tolerance in some ways is putting up with something that you don't like. or something that you'd rather not have in your space. So I'm going to take the risk now of suggesting a personal way forward that might make you a little uncomfortable, but here it is nevertheless. I'm talking now about what we as individuals can do to preserve religious liberty for all. Not talking about changing a church or changing a nation or changing a state or changing laws. I think in terms of practical steps, what we can do personally is probably the most we can do for most of us. So I'm going to suggest that we move towards a quasi-religious pluralism. And I know pluralism might, as I said, create some concerns for some. But here's how I see it. It's an ethic for living together in a diverse society. It's not just tolerance, but an active seeking of understanding across lines of differences. It is not recognizing that there's diversity, but it is engaging in that diversity as much as we can. And this kind of religious pluralism does not require us to leave our identities and our commitments. It means that we hold our differences, even our religious differences, but in relation to others and their particular religious commitments. It's based on dialogue and encounter and give and take, criticism and self-criticism, all of those kind of openness to understanding. Quasi-pluralism involves a commitment to being at the table with one's commitments. So I'm suggesting that the way to move forward in this issue of competing religious freedoms is understanding the other, being engaged with the other. And I suspect that the more we do that individually, the less fearful we would be about the differences that we think exist. Quasi-pluralism is a state of being where every individual in a religiously diverse society has the rights, freedoms, and safety to worship or not according to their conscience. I'm suggesting that individually and intentionally that we move towards this notion of religious pluralism. And that is one way, I think, that we can contribute to minimizing the tensions of religious freedom. So with that, I will suggest that we pass this on to you. What are the challenges to the free exercise of freedom of conscience, religious freedom, religious liberty as you see them? What pathways do you see to overcome these challenges? And what examples can you share with this group to help us better get a handle on this topic? So with that, Randy, I will thank you all for listening.